Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal podcast. Our guest today is Jeremy Haas. Jeremy is the founder of Prefix Ops. Jeremy, thanks for taking the time to chat.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm happy to be on the podcast here and share my knowledge and have this conversation.
My pleasure, Jeremy. Before we get started, we have a couple of topics and we'll get started with one of them. If you could just give a brief introduction to our audience about yourself, your company, and what you currently do.
I'm the founder of Prefix Ops, as you mentioned. The business is surrounded around fractional business operations, fractional chief of staff services. So the best way I explain to everyone who doesn't quite understand that is I'm an extension of the founding members that I work with, so that way they can unlock more potential within their business and be that force multiplier that they are.
Thank you for the introduction, Jeremy. So we want to talk about a couple of things, and we'll let the conversation organically take us to where it needs to go. Let's get started with leveraging AI to enhance your workforce. So if you could just tell us what you've been doing recently, and specifically how it's been different from what you've been doing similar things maybe a year or 2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, this whole world has been shifting to use AI over the last 12 to 24 months. And honestly, things have changed drastically. I mean, even the last few months alone, I'm testing new tools, and by the time I'm done testing them, they've become obsolete. So AI is rapidly evolving and changing how things move. And at the same time, we have these conversations around how we can ensure our workforce is leveraging AI properly to do the best they possibly can. But there's also always those issues where it's like, do we use AI or do we and replace employees, or do we lean into our employees? For me, I lean heavily into both of saying, let's use AI to bring out the best potential in our workforce.
Okay, so that's a good place to start. Can you take some examples of work that you're doing currently, Jeremy, where like say just tell us how you did something similar without using these AI tools and technologies, maybe a year, 2, 3 years ago, and how you're using them. You can speak to the specific tools, so we know what those tools are. But before we get to the tooling, I want to sort of understand the problem that you're solving using those tools, and how were you solving that same or similar problems earlier without those tools, and how are those tools helping you solve those problems today, and then we can get into the specifics of what those tools are.
Of course. And yeah, so I mean, the general problems I focus on, especially with a lot of my clients, is how can we how can we optimize our time in our jobs and our daily work that we're doing. So if we're spending 8 hours a day working, how can we get the most out of that 8 hours? And a lot of people spend a lot of time with all this busy work where it's like building reports, pulling up reports, communicating with each other, updating CRMs and other tools to ensure everything is accurate and essentially speaking with each other. And most of the time, we don't have a lot of automations in place to do that. I mean, if for most of us, we have like 20, 30 tabs open on our computer at any given time because we're bouncing between tools. We can leverage automation so that way a lot of these things flow seamlessly. So when one thing updates, the rest of the tools update, as well as update the rest of our team on what they need to know or when they need to take action themselves. So, kind of the main tool I use around that is Zapier.
Okay, and so when you're using that tool, how are you using it differently today? In other words, is it the features that they've made available that's helping you do things differently from how you used to do things in the past?
Yeah, I mean, the initial thing that started with Zapier has been, hey, let's allow different tools to speak to each other. So, like I said, the workflows from one tool to the next work seamlessly. Now, what Zapier is leaned into is leveraging AI as this orchestration tool to do a lot more with it. So, building AI agents to actually go out and do certain tasks for you. So now I've built for multiple clients of mine this little chatbot we have in Slack where you can ask it a question about certain tools that you have, and it will go find the answer for you. So I could sit there and essentially have an executive assistant in my pocket at any given time where I'll say, hey, could uh, AI chatbot pull me the reports of the sales from last week? And it'll go search for it and give it to you in less than 20 seconds.
So let's go with that example. You're talking about sales reports, but those are not public reports, right? That's documentation that's within the VPN, within the network of that particular organization. So how do you configure this tool, for instance? Like, let's say they're using different places to store their documents. They could be using, I don't know, like SharePoint or Box.com or other types of systems also as a document repository. So how does this tooling work, Jeremy? If you can just speak a little bit to what that integration looks like.
So the reason I use Zapier is because they've already built in integrations with thousands of different tools. So the common ones that we use, Google Suite. So if you store everything in Google Drive, whether you use Notion or Asana for project management, Jira, everything that there is, the main tools that are out there in the market, they've already built these connections there. So gone are the days that you have to hire a software engineering team to set up the API connections and configure it properly. Zapier does it all for you. And if you're like me, I'm not a software engineer myself. So trying to set up all these API connections can be a headache. So what Zapier's also included, and many other tools have as well, is they have an AI copilot where you can actually just, the whole vibe coding sort of era that we're in, ask the AI copilot within Zapier, hey, I want to build this. I'm trying to automate report flow into a chat AI chatbot, and it will build it for you in minutes. And all you have to do is just configure it, saying, hey, let's use this as the documentation source. Here's where I want it to output. Here's the sort of calls that we're going to use in Slack, for instance. Like we'll say we designate call signs, so it's I'll use my name for instance. It's like Jeremy is the chatbot. We'll say, "Hey Jeremy, pull me report ABC," and it'll use that as the call to initiate the Zap to go find the report and give it back to you. And we can also designate any reports that we pull. Uh, we can say put it in, just copy and paste it into Slack, or we can say you're always going to update a certain file within the Google Drive. The sky's the limit, but it does take time to set up. But whether it's all internal information or even searching online, these AI agents have so much power now that we can really unlock a lot of our time.
You provided some great examples there. Thank you. So let's dig deeper into some of those. So you mentioned Zapier, one of the platforms where they have these predefined, pre-configured connectors or integrations to a number of these external systems. So that part is kind of already done, right? That's the value that they bring to the table. You also mentioned vibe coding and prompting our way as folks these days to getting stuff done without necessarily knowing it, right? I mean, you're a vibe coder, you don't have to have ever done development, but you're actually able to build software. And then you can extrapolate that to, various other facets of any organization and to many walks of life as well outside of engineering. Now, given that as context, Jeremy, where do you, like by you, I mean us, but I'm just going to point this question at you because, it's easy for me to ask, right? The guest a question here. Where do you, as Jeremy, see yourself make those differentiations? In other words, now that a tool start to do a lot of stuff, the barriers to entry were not particularly very high for software engineering because you don't need, I mean, nobody asked people kind of be nice to have a college diploma, but I mean, I never cared for one. I mean, I did go to college, but when we hired people, that was never at the top of my expectations. Similarly, you don't need any certifications. If you have them, great. Honestly, at Snowpal, we don't even ask for it. If you're in an industry that's highly regulated or that requires certain certifications and formal education like medicine or law, because you got to pass the bar and prove to the court, I'm sure that you are actually legal to practice law in a certain place. Software is unlike that, so you don't need those things. The barrier to entry by virtue of that was low enough already. Vibe coding and AI and AI agents and everything that's happening in magical ways these days has only made that bar even lower. That, given that, tell me what your thoughts are on that. But if that's kind of true, and if you do agree, where do you see you making those distinctions so there's those differentiation between Jeremy and Jeremy's company as a service provider versus say Krish's company as a service provider?
Yeah, I mean it's kind of the wild west right now in terms of AI and vibe coding tools. The way I see it is it's you can have an idea, and 5, 10 years ago it took you several months to build this MVP. You have this idea, you want to launch a business, and you go, either you build the tool yourself or you go to someone like you and say, hey, help me build this tool. And we're looking at a couple of months planning it out and spending tens of thousands of dollars to build it, to see if something will work. Now that barrier to entry, like you said, is extremely low, because I could say, hey, I want to build a dog walking app geared toward these types of people, and something like Claude will build it in 10 minutes, and then I could sit there and say, no, I don't like this, I want to try to change that. And it really lowers that entry to start a business. The problem that we're seeing right now is that code vibe coding is sort of an incomplete picture of it. So I haven't yet seen a multi-billion-dollar business be built off of vibe coding. We're not there yet. I do think at some point we will, but now we're starting to see things, which I'm sure you've seen it as well. I've seen jobs pop up where it's like a vibe coding assistant, where your job is to clean up everything that Claude or Lovable builds, because it's not perfect. It's almost like an entry level software engineer sort of code, but it just does it so fast. So what that means for someone like me is I'm in business operations, so there's always going to need to be a human element there, but I can do what a team of 10 used to do, because of all the different tools. But what it also allows me to do, working with a lot of startups, I love vibe coding. I love using Lovable because it allows me to communicate more effectively with software engineers, because I can have all of these ideas in my head and understand how to speak. But if I can't portray to you what the vision is, it's going to be hard to. There's always going to be the disconnect between you and I. So what vibe coding allows us to do, I can build a mock-up of a website within a few minutes on Lovable and say, hey, here's my starting point of what I want. Now let's work from here to make it this multi-billion-dollar company that we know it can be, sort of thing.
Some, there's quite a few things to unpack based on what you just said there. Two parts, right, at the highest level. One is you said, the tools have made, they've come a long way, but there's still some distance to go, but they're only going to get better. Nobody's questioning that. Claude's releasing these models, it's just getting better and better. They started releasing their source code along with their models, which is not a good thing. No, I'm just kidding. You probably saw the news where there was a leak of their source code, but otherwise, incredible company with amazing, what they're doing is there's no question really to ask there. And we all believe that it's going to continue to improve, and they're going to go public soon. I think in the next, I don't know, month or two, from what I'm reading. So you can only imagine what kind of growth that they probably bring to the table. That's the good thing. Now, the other part of it is the second side, of it is you mentioned that it's got its issues. I mean, just like if you're hiring a junior developer, or it doesn't matter who, it could be even a senior dev. I mean, it's human to make mistakes. The tool probably is going to make fewer mistakes in the long run, but it still does make some mistakes today. So that's a given. I just want to summarize that part. On the other side, you mentioned that you're able to do 10, the productivity increases tenfold because of these tools becoming available. So what Jeremy would have needed nine other people to do, he's able to now get done by himself, which means when you have the nine other people, you can do 10 times more. Right? That's the other side that we also acknowledge. I want to set that as a context, and I want to ask a couple of things. You probably saw the news, Jeremy, from a couple of weeks ago, where AWS had a lot of issues and outages, more than one outage, and they attributed that to code being generated. And I believe they had a requirement where you have to run it through a senior dev before you committed code. Right? You can generate all the code you want, but before you push it to production, you still have to make sure that a human reviews that code. I saw some news, I think earlier today, which was in China. I think it was one of the big, I think in Wuhan, if I'm not wrong, a number of these self-driving cars were stuck, like hundreds of them, I believe, and they had to kind of recover because they were just randomly, they stalled in the middle of the road across the city. So on one side, tremendous progress is being made, but at the same time, some part of it could be not mature enough, right? We read about this all the time, right? Whether it's Teslas or whatnot. So where do you think we ought to be careful as people doing it? So the two questions, right? That's the context of my question is, where do you think we have to exercise caution as humans? And the second part is back to my original question, which is given that these tools are available, how do Krish and Jeremy differentiate themselves when they go to a client and say, hey, we can do it because we both have the same machine, say the same access to all of these tools and subscriptions. So what differentiates the two of us?
Yeah, I mean, again, we're kind of in this wild west of this sort of era, and the way I kind of look at all of this, we're leaning heavily into using AI. There's no going back from it essentially because we've already become accustomed of how fast things can operate and iterations can be made. But that being said, is the vast majority of people right now that are using AI and different tools are also using it too much. So they're going a little too far off the deep end, which is why we're kind of seeing this sort of recorrection in everything that we're doing. So we're going to see a lot of downturns, unfortunately, and this is what we've seen when people were adopting the internet, when the iPhone came out, and people were starting to go mobile first instead of computer first. Uh, there's always a shift, but there's this learning moment that we're kind of in right now over the next probably 12 months or so, 12 to 18 months, I would probably say, where we're going to see this correction where people are going to have to learn how to use AI effectively. But what it's also going to do is bring out this new generation of workers. So entry level workers are going to have to be these exceptional people who can differentiate themselves. And the same thing for older workers, more senior executives. We have to find ways to differentiate ourselves. And the way we do that for someone like you and I is really on the intangible things that AI cannot do yet. At some point, maybe it will, but for the most part, we can look at it and say, hey, well, this is a perfect scenario. This is what AI will build, but here's how people are going to actually react, and here's how we need to adjust for it. So, a perfect example would be running ads. Uh, I run Facebook meta ads on Facebook and Instagram constantly for my clients, and I could have ChatGPT, Grok, everything just sort of build all the creatives and run the ads for me, and it'll deliver, sure, but it's up to me to really define and say like, hey, well, these won't really matter to our customers, so we need to tweak it to play on the emotional side of things, and that's a sort of intangible that AI won't have for quite some time. At some point, maybe it will, but when that does happen, uh, we'll be in a completely different space and have another different problem that we'll be able to tackle and differentiate ourselves that way. But right now, the human element is where we differentiate ourselves.
Good points there, right? One of the things I'll say is I almost don't even like to say it because it's become such a boring cliche, but I have to come up with a better way to say this boring thing, but I'll because I don't know it yet, I'll say it the way it's just being said right now, which is AI is not going to necessarily replace humans, but AI is going to replace humans who do not use AI to get their stuff done, right? Something along those lines, right? That's what everybody's saying. I think we all get the gist of what that means, but I sometimes struggle to understand what that specifically means. Does it simply mean that I have to go look for tools like anybody, any two people using AI tools are going to be the same? Which means, why is that even a statement to be made? Let me rephrase what I'm trying to ask, Jeremy. What trying to ask here is, we all know that these tools are available, and if you don't know what those tools are, you can always ask the chatbot to tell you what those tools can or should even be, and then you go end up looking up those tools and you can start using those tools. So for the life of me, I cannot imagine why someone would not want to do that, and I personally don't know anybody who's not willing to want to do that, because people have acknowledged that, one, it's important, and two, it actually does make the life much easier, so they are going to do it. If that is
Yeah,
in
I mean,
fact
people.
true,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah. People are always going to have this sort of again just shift. hey, if we don't use AI, if we're not going to adopt it, we're going to get left behind sort of mentality. But that's not true. Um, if you look at marketing as a perfect example, just our mediums of marketing over the last 20 years have changed dramatically in where people's attention is. It went from radio to TV to websites to Google searches to social media and so on and so on. But as rapidly as technology has changed over the last 20 years, we're still seeing success promoting on radio. We're still seeing success doing ads on TV. Those things haven't gone away and they're not going away for quite some time. So even the people who don't adopt AI right now and say, I'm jumping headfirst into this and into the deep end and really using it, they're not going to be left behind like the world thinks that we're going to. Uh, it's going to make things a little more difficult for them because AI is going to force us to iterate faster. Gone are the days of saying, I don't know how to do this. Okay, go on ChatGPT, ask how to start running Facebook ads. It'll give you a step-by-step instruction how to do it. Hey, I want to learn more about this topic. Cool, go to ChatGPT. There's a deep learning where you can start saying, hey, teach me about how to invest in stocks. It'll teach you. So we can no longer have the excuse of saying, I don't know how to do this. That's what it's going to force the people who don't adopt AI to really focus on. So if they are very good at what they do in traditional media or traditional uh, ways we accomplish things, they have to be extremely exceptional. They can't be like, hey, I'm here. So again, software engineer is the perfect example. That being in Silicon Valley, being in the Bay Area, software engineers are sort of dime a dozen, so to speak. But at the same time, the good ones are like rock stars, and we're going to see another wave of that in sort of every profession.
Yeah, I think I like the way you worded that, which is, there are people doing, you have a certain skill, right? You have a certain passion. You have, one of those ikaga, I think the Japanese Venn diagrams, where what are you good at? What is the world willing to pay for? And, those things have to intersect. So there's this beautiful medium in the middle. So you took the example of software engineers, and I've been doing this all my life, right? That's my only career. And I've worked with a number of engineers, and when you tell one from the other, a good engineer from a not so good one, personally speaking, Jeremy, it's never been the language of choice that makes the distinction to me, not the frameworks or the libraries. I've always thought that the problem solving abilities that an individual brings to the table is going to be the differentiator. Maybe Jeremy is not a Python programmer, maybe you're a Golang programmer. To me, the way we generally have hired at Snowpal is we never look for that particular language. We're like, hey, if Jeremy is good in Golang, it's not going to be too difficult for Jeremy to pick up Python and start contributing. There are companies that I used to consult in my previous life, and they're like, hey, have you used this version of this library? If you've not, then we don't want to work with you, right? And that's that. I always thought that was a silly way of hiring people. So a lot of things are changing, starting also with the hiring process. That's one more thing I want to touch upon. Like when you're trying to work with people, trying to onboard somebody for your own company, maybe for your clients, how are you starting to interview differently? One is I'm going to presume a few things, and if you can just add or correct me where I'm wrong. You're going to figure out what AI tools that they're currently using, whether it's specific or it makes sense in the context of the problems you're solving. But that'll tell you if they're actually keeping up with what's changing, right? They're not living under a rock where they didn't care to understand any of these things. But beyond those, what are some things that you're looking for that's generally different from what you might have looked for in the past as a skill set?
So that's something I'm continuing to learn myself. How can I adjust my hiring strategy and interview skills in this new era? So I actually speak to quite a few different entrepreneurs and recruiters on how can we better serve ourselves to find the right employees. So I lean heavily into less so the skills that you have, and try to find out who you are as a person, the intangible things, how dealing with startups. it takes a certain type of personality. I don't want the person who's going to say that's not in my contract, I'm not going to do it. I want the person who's going to say, hey, you need coffee? Sure. What do you guys want? I want those type of people on my team, and there's many different ways I can bring that out in someone, even if they're trying to play to the questions that I ask. So the typical questions we ask in interviews, like, oh, where do you see yourself in 5 years, or how do you solve this sort of problem? All of that's changing, and it doesn't really bring out a lot of the people. So I pride myself in curveballs, the curveball questions. Again, it's not what a lot of people ask, and I try to dig out who they are at their core. Are they willing to work? Are they willing to learn? Are they willing to continue to learn when new things come out? Are they set in their ways? Those are the things that I try to figure out whenever I interview people. So I'm constantly trying to develop new questions around it. But my favorite question when I interview people that brings out the most of their personality is always something along the lines of, if you were a superhero, who would you be and why? Because psychologically, you're going to attach yourself to a certain superhero based off of your personality. And this was asked of me when I was back in college interviewing for jobs, and the hiring manager who interviewed me was a psychologist in a previous life. And so she actually, after the interview, told me what my answer described about me, and she was perfectly right down to how I operate, how I act, and who I am. And so ever since then, everyone I've interviewed, I've always reached back out to her and asked her, "Hey, someone gave me this answer. What does that mean?" And for the most part, she's been right about it. So I try to find those curveballs that bring out the personality more so than the skills. But not to say the skills don't matter.
Jeremy, I smiled a bit there because if somebody had asked me that question, I figured I might just fail the interview, and here is why. I, as somebody who did not, I watch a lot of cinema, but not so much the action hero movies. So I couldn't tell the difference between the DC or the Marvel, characters or anything along those lines. So I was just thinking, if somebody asked me that question, I'll have to go with the Indian cinema that I do watch. I come from the southern part of India, and all of our movies are based on unintentional superheroes, meaning it's not so much a character, the person himself or herself becomes a superhero. So if you interviewed me, Jeremy, I'm going to come up with a bizarro answer, but I think that's good. That's good to know, right? But one of the things you said there that also I think is important is you said that you pride yourself in being able to come up with those questions. Now, again, therein there is this human value there, right? You're not relying on a chatbot to tell you what you should be asking, because if we end up relying on these tools, that's kind of a segue to the next set of things I want to ask you is it's kind of difficult, I think, to tell where the line is between where should you stop thinking and where should you let the tool do the thinking, because what you're trying to think has already been thought of for a long time. So you would rather not do the thinking because you're wasting time, as opposed to areas where you got to do the thinking for n number of reasons, because by virtue of doing the thinking you create the differentiation, or maybe you're able to solve the problems better. Now this is easier said than done, and genuinely, to be honest with you, from as a developer, as a software architect, that's one place I've still haven't figured out as to where should I actually not be thinking and where should I really be thinking, because sometimes you sit there and expect the code to be generated and you're like, you know what, why am I not able to do this? Am I resting my agencies and intellect because the tool's able to do it? And sometimes the tool doesn't do a great job and you start taking it and refactoring it, whereas you could have done a slightly better job perhaps prompting differently to begin with, or maybe not relying entirely upon on the tool. So there's a lot of nuances here. How do you go about it? Where do you draw the line between, hey, nope, Jeremy's got to make these decisions, he's going to have to solve these problems, versus nope, the tool is going to do it because you don't have to do it?
And that's kind of where we have to learn the sweet spot of using AI to its advantages. Because again, the world we're in right now is sort of, you're either not using it at all or you're using it too much, and so we don't know that right balance. For me personally, the way I look at it is the same way I approach my clients is everyone is different and everyone's unique in their own way. So the same solution that'll work for me may not work for you. Uh, for me, the balance of AI is really keeping me on track. And I leverage my tools to keep me moving forward in everything I do. So, the example that I'll give you is me being an operations person. I generally have my hands in every facet of a business. Every single one of my clients, I touch everything. So, from finance to strategy to engineering to sales and marketing, I my job is to know how the entire machine works. And the problem with being an operations person is I start chasing shiny objects. I see something that may solve a problem here, and part of me wants to go try and find out if it will solve it. So I have to have the discipline in order to say no. Let's stay on track. Let's do what we talked about with the strategy. We can look at that later. And so I leverage AI tools to really keep me on track. So I lean heavy into using tools like Notion to do task management, project management, and set target dates on when things will get done. And I leverage AI tools to really keep that on track. So if I'm coming up on a deadline and I haven't done anything, again, I have a little chat bot that'll say, Jeremy, get to work. You haven't done anything here. Why not? And it'll hound me. Like I actually created, I created it to uh, I created to sort of talk negatively to me sometimes and really beat into me because growing up I was that kid who responded to tough coaches. I love those coaches that got in my face and yelled at me saying I need to do this, I need to do that. Some people prefer the more coddling coaches. I don't. So my little AI chatbots do the same thing. They'll uh, to give you an idea. I let it call me stupid sometimes. It will.
So Jeremy, as an entrepreneur, do you there's no I mean there's no right or wrong answer, but do you look to use AI tools? I'm going to have you list some of your favorite ones as well before we end the session. But let's say, do you look to use some of these tools make you and your team more productive so you can scale, solve more problems? That's one way, and not so mutually exclusive. But another way is you look for problems that can actually be solved by literally using one or more of these tools. So you actually go look out for those types of problems that can be addressed by using a combination of tools and make that sort of your niche, right? In being able to provide that sort of a service, even from an operations standpoint. They're both distinct approaches. And again, they may or may not be mutually exclusive, but I was just curious to know, where do you generally see that you lean?
Yeah, I mean it's again everything at my core, like with AI, I look at it kind of like video games or books, and the the people who will come out on top are going to be the ones who understand how to play the game and understand where the tools best fit. So again, it's what tools work for me may not work for you. I like certain games, you may like different games. That's kind of the world we have to be in. So I I dabble in so many different tools to find out where they may fit in elsewhere. And so when my clients come to me, they're like, "Hey, I like this tool, or I saw this tool," and I'll actually go to them and say, "No, that doesn't fit you, and here's why. I played with that tool. It doesn't fit your sort of working style or anything like that, and I'll recommend a different tool because I've played the different games that are out there."
Fair enough. What are some of your favorite? I know you mentioned some already. You mentioned Lovable, for instance. You mentioned Notion, but what is the list of those tools that Jeremy is using on a daily or a weekly basis?
The tools I use on a daily basis are Zapier, Notion, and Slack. At its core, every single one of my clients are going to go around that uh, because like the connectivity, the knowledge transfer, the data management, it's those are three core tools along with communication. Other tools I love are Lovable. Uh, it's becoming more and more powerful, and I have yet to play with the Shopify integrations that they've put out. I have a couple clients that are building Shopify stores, so I'm happy to dig into that more and see what capabilities are there. But like my entire website is built on Lovable that I did in 10 minutes. It's not perfect, but it's better than what I did myself on WordPress without using AI. So Lovable is great to get that again that starting point until you're at the point where you need to redo it with a professional to add the human elements. And there's so many other ones out there, but those are the core ones I use almost every day. The one I hope to find is a good tool that's out there. Like Chirp is one where it's AI phone calls, AI dialers. I haven't found a good one that's out there yet. There've been a million of them that pop up, but uh, I'm always looking to see what new tools are out there. Kind of like when I was a kid, what new games are coming out this week and ones I want to play.
It's important, right? To keeping up with the tools, that the list keeps growing, right? Every other day there is a new tool essentially. And like you said, using some of these like Lovable, I've had a lot of people tell me that they are not coders themselves. They vibe coded their way to not just prototyping but also going live, for instance. Maybe 80% of the way it can take you there, but in many cases it can take you 100% of the way there, right? Just depending on the complexity of what it is that you're building. Now, is this a double-edged sword, Jeremy? Because in some scenarios where you don't care to learn about something, you just want to get it done, the tools are going to be very handy. But can it become problematic if people end up relying on a lot of these tools without understanding the foundations and the fundamentals of the business that they happen to be in? It could be software engineering, it could be something else, it could be medicine. You know, do do you do you ever have a concern that we might end up in a world where a bunch of people are using a bunch of tools, so the folks who are creating those tools happen to be the really smart ones, right? You're working on creating those tools, but to use those tools, sure, you need a certain level of intellect, I'm not denying that. But as the world's population continues to increase, as more companies need fewer people to get traditional stuff done, you're going to have to be able to be good enough to do new things that may or may not exist today, jobs and roles and positions that we don't even know of, because on an average day you're reading waking up to Oracle laying off 30,000 people because he's spending more of their money in those data centers. The same thing at Amazon, same thing at, I think, Block, XYZ is the ticker symbol. They laid off, like let go of 40% of their company not too long ago. So how do you sort of mentally prepare for something of that nature?
I mean, yeah, we're going to see. I guess the simplest word is the dumbification of the world because of AI tools. And kind of like I said, over the next 12 to 18 months will probably be the critical point of which direction we're truly going, whether it's, hey, this is a recorrection or we truly are going downhill in our critical thinking. But it is important to have the foundations. What we're going to see over the next several years is a lot of these things where it's built off of vibe coding or truly built by just AI, and people are running businesses where they don't understand how it's being run or why it's being run, why they're doing certain things, and it's going to come back and bite them. A perfect example, I'm sort of waiting on it for it to drop, was crypto is a perfect example. It was supposed to be completely anonymous, but now with Coinbase and other platforms, it's becoming less anonymous because now it's become taxable events. But the whole purpose of it being anonymous, people thought they didn't have to pay taxes. At some point, I do think, like crypto, you're going to have to deal with these massive tax bills that some people will have because they didn't pay taxes on it. So it's going to be the same thing with AI, where there's going to be a crash at some point. There has to be, because you can only prop up things so much until it collapses. And the collapse is going to be that turning point, like I said. Will it show us, is it a correction, or is it a free fall where we're going into like the Disney movie Wally, where we're just going to all become fat, sitting on chairs, doing nothing, and seeing TV screens in front of us where robots do everything else. That could be a possibility. We don't know, but the only thing that we can do is wait for that to happen And what I do for my mindset is I train Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and what it teaches me is how to deal with uncertainty like this. And the the answer for me is I don't let it bother me. I take what comes. I I deal with what's right in front of me. I do have the foresight of what can come next, but I don't worry about it until it happens.
I think I couldn't agree more, right? You can only cross the bridge when it comes literally. You can only prepare so much. It's like saying, right, you're planning for the next 5 years and then life happens, right? They are, like it or not, pretty mutually exclusive. But the thing is, right, people, a lot of things are changing even fundamentally, like college and degrees and diploma. And I kind of ask of this to people I talk to, as having someone who spent a fair bit of time in college myself. And I go back and think about whether I should or shouldn't have, even without AI. I had a good time, but I don't know if all of the time was necessary. Maybe 2 years was good enough. I didn't have to be in college for like 8 long years. Now, as we go look into the future, the immediate future at least, right? Not 5 years because it's too far, maybe 6 months to a year. College degrees and diplomas are becoming less important, yet there's a societal expectation sometimes, and some of it is cultural as well. And I can speak to as somebody who's born and raised in India. You're expected, it's a given. Everybody goes to college for the most part, so you're going not because you want to go, just because everybody else is doing it, you're doing it too. But that's not going to be necessarily helpful, because you don't need to do operating systems and data structures and storage management and data management and caching. I mean, you don't need to learn any of this if you can use Lovable and build everything. And if you can prompt your way to building software, why bother spending 4 years in college learning how to build software? So things have to change. Colleges have to change. You don't want to borrow money, probably you should not borrow money. So are there some lifestyle changes that you're seeing people make both personally and professionally as we enter this space of uncertainty? Or do you know people mostly sticking to what they have done in the past, only making slight adjustments to the tsunami that's most likely coming?
Yeah, I mean, growing up as a millennial, there's always this sort of push like, hey, you go to high school, you graduate, then you go to college, then you get your degree, then you get a good job, and you work, and then you retire. Uh, Gone are those days. Uh, and what we're seeing now, which is most people have a college degree now. So the value of a bachelor's degree is essentially what a high school diploma was 30 years ago in the 80s and 90s. Uh, but now at the same time, there's almost a negative stigma of what a college degree is. And I'll be the first to say that, look, my job as an operations person, you don't need a college degree. All the stuff I've learned has been on the job. Yes, there have been common things about finance. I studied finance in college. There were certain things that I learned in school that are useful, but probably 98% of what I do on a daily basis, I've learned on the job. So for certain fields, college is 100% useless. It's a nice to have. Now, if you're going to university for, say, a business degree, if you're studying finance and you get into Wharton or you get into Chicago Booth, those are the two top finance programs in the world, I believe. That makes a difference than, say, me trying to go into finance. But if you're trying to be a doctor, an attorney, those require specialized school. That's where it makes sense. But in my opinion, and for some people having this certain degrees where it's arts or something like that, where it doesn't really truly serve a purpose. Even to me, like an art degree, it's it's subjective. Like your art, kind of, again going back to playing video games. I like certain video games. You like different video games. It's the same thing about art. No one really sees the art the way you see it. So there's certain degrees that shouldn't matter, and people are racking up debt because they're sort of pushed into it. Uh, I tell everyone now, it's like, hey, if you want to go to college, great. But what's better is finding finding the path that you want to be happy and find a job that a career that you love. So I grew up around the military where my parents wanted me to join the military. It wasn't a world for me, uh, but they were also the type of parents where they said, "Find what you love." They supported me 100% of the way. When I said I was starting a business, they supported me when my first business failed. They supported me when I said I was going to do it again, and they called me crazy. But those are the types of parents that they didn't look down on me for taking the path I did. A lot of people in my generation, as millennials and even younger kids, have the stigma of adults are pushing them in a certain direction because they think they know what's best for them, which I understand, but they need to allow the kids to find their own path at the same time.
That's very important. It's very important because I want to take that as even personal advice because I have a son and it's something you live and learn on a daily basis because it takes time to understand everybody. And I can say that you think that because they are your child that they might like the same things you would, and then you recognize maybe not, their interests could be similar, could be different, could be very different. So yeah, to be able to have that the mental acumen to accept it is, I think it's a god-given blessing, Jeremy, because a lot of us are a product of the environment we grow up in. So even if you know that there is a right way to doing some things, your inner muscle, the muscle memory, sometimes makes you do things based on habit and based on learnings from the last 3 decades as opposed to the facts that are literally in front of you, right? So no, I truly appreciate what you shared there. um, you know, I've been throwing a bunch of questions at you. We've got about another, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes to go. I want to pause here so you can catch your breath and ask me anything that you might want to ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I love these questions. You're allowing me to kind of go off the rails without going off the rails too much. Because again, as an operations person, I can go off into many different directions. Uh, but as we see this shift, kind of like what I was saying, what's important to me with a lot of people, with my clients, with my family, is chasing happiness. So my question to you is, looking back at your career, looking back at everything you've accomplished and what you're going to accomplish over the next several years, is it something that truly made you happy?
You know what, Jeremy? You could have asked me an easier question. Maybe a programming question would be easier, maybe something else. This is an incredibly nice question, but it's an incredibly difficult one. But I'm going to answer that, to the best of my ability. Um, we think we want something in life, and this might sound philosophical. If it does, my apologies. I'm going to try to make it as objective as possible. Because, as engineers, we like to make things quantitative, like I almost always say, because that's how we understand them. The more subjectivity there is, the less we tend to understand. But I'm going to start with a subjective answer, and hopefully I can work my way to an objective one. At every phase of life you think this is what's the most important thing to you, right? Like today, if you wake up in the morning, when you woke up, you're like, yeah, I know you have a set of things that you want to accomplish today, this week, this day, and this month, but that's only defined by what you need to do in that window of time, because your client's expecting something, because your family's expecting something, because you're expecting something out of yourself. But we don't necessarily acknowledge the fact that that importance that you associate with that activity, it's going to dissipate very soon, right? 6 months down the road, what you thought was the most important thing that you're doing today becomes the least important thing. Things that you associated a lot of value to become not so important. So part of the discovery, as I've seen as I've grown older, is trying to figure out what are some things that have continued to be important and what are some things that have ceased to become important. And that becomes a little bit more obvious as you grow older, but it becomes hazier as you grow older as well. So I can speak to my own experience. I was in college for like almost 8 years. um, I don't know if I enjoyed studying as much, maybe not, but maybe I enjoyed the experience of being in college. That's all I can think of. And then I got out of college and I've picked up my first job, which was in programming at the time. I had no idea how to answer any of those questions. The way college ends up teaching a lot of us is it teaches you a number of things, but very few that you can put to practice right after you graduate. Right? When you get your first job, you end up learning that first line of code from somebody who's done that for a long time. And you appreciate what they teach you because that's real skills. You learn these vocational skills even in the space of what you're doing that you actually need to live life. Theory is only going to take you so far and probably not going to take you too far at all. And now, when you fast forward like 3 decades or 2.5 decades since I went to college, a number of things have changed, but yet some things have not changed. And I'll speak to some of those things. The programming languages have continued to change. The libraries, the frameworks, the fact that AI was not around like a few years ago and it's here lock, stock, and barrel, they've all changed. But what has actually not changed, Jeremy, is the need to solve problems better than somebody else. You give me a problem, I had to solve it a certain way 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I have to solve it a certain way today, and I have to solve it a slightly different way later, tomorrow, or 5 years down the road. You have to back yourself in how you're going to solve those problems. You can't be married to how you did them at a certain point of time. Then you're going to become dated. You have to understand that you have to back yourself in how you're solving the problems, but you have to take those chances in doing them slightly differently from how the world might expect of you to doing it. If there is going to be a gap there consistently, and the more you try to bridge that gap, the more unhappy I would personally be. The place where I find happiness, to your question, is where I let those gaps exist and I give myself the liberty to doing things wrong, figuring out what I did wrong, identifying those discrepancies, and finding the solutions that work best for me in the context of the problems that I'm solving, rather than blindly go look up how somebody else is doing it, how some other tool is doing it, and have those tools dictate the way I live life. And it's an interesting conundrum for people like me because as coders, we did generate code even before AI was there, right? We only wrote code that we had to write, but nowadays you have to write even lesser code. At the same time, you don't want to be at the mercy of the tools that you're using, because I was never a fan of these low code tools or low code, no code tools, because I found myself, even when I try to experiment with them out of curiosity, that as opposed to them solving my problem, I end up tweaking my requirements so they could solve that problem better because the tool only did X, Y, and Z. So I had to adjust my needs and requirements so the tool can do its job well. But by virtue of doing that, I ended up solving a different problem, not the one I had to begin with. Now, thankfully, the AI tools and models that are much better than these low code and no code tools of the past. So they do a much better job. But even that being said, I think there's a constant challenge and struggle between doing what makes sense versus what the tool does for you. And you only draw professional happiness when you actually feel like you've contributed enough and brought enough to the table. Just by virtue of me prompting my way to building stuff, I don't find myself finding the happiness. And if that happens to be the only way to live life, I would have to do something quite different, because I have to feel like my intellect is being constantly challenged. Otherwise, I'm going to be an unhappy camper just trying to, live life, work to pay bills, and then die eventually, right? Your passion's not going to be able to come into play. I know it was a long-winded answer, but hopefully in some part of the ramble, there were some things that answered the question that you actually did ask.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely did answer the question. I love the answer, and thank you for answering it. So I'll kind of tell you why I asked that question the way I did. And to preface it is, as we progress through this crazy world that we're going through right now, with the shifts in the world of business and our personal lives around AI, especially in technology, we have to learn how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable. And so it goes back to exactly what we were talking about the entire time on this podcast, is like, how are we dealing with change? And if we're so set in our ways, we'll never be happy, because we'll always be frustrated. We'll always sit there and say, oh, well, this changed. We used to do this back in the day. which reminds me, I've been doing that about gas prices lately. I've been talking to my nephews and nieces. I'm like, back when I was a kid, gas was $2 a gallon. It's one of those things where if we get stuck in our ways, we forget to see the joy in how things are progressing, how things are changing, and that we always do have that opportunity to continue to move forward regardless of what the outcomes are. And so, like, a challenge I have for everyone is to learn how to be comfortable in the uncomfortable situations, but also just don't be afraid to change your path if what your current path is no longer serving you. If it doesn't make you happy anymore, like what you said, it's go find something else that does. And like it kind of goes full circle with everything we talked about. So I love that you answered it the way you did as well.
Oh, thanks for that. Anything else you want to ask me?
No, I mean we've talked about so much on here, and honestly, I feel like we could sit here for hours and talk about so much more. So I, I'm going to shut up right now because I do have a lot of questions, but for the sake of time, I don't want to keep going.
Yeah, no worries. Which means it kind of brings us to the end of our conversation here. Just a couple of other things I'll ask you, and then we should be good. Let's say you're going out for dinner, Jeremy. You can pick what you want to eat. Obviously, money is no object. What would be your order for an appetizer, an entree, and dessert? And they don't all have to be part of the same cuisine.
Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, especially since I'm a big foodie. I love food. Me personally, if I'm going to go get food, any meal I want, I'm going to Austin, Texas. I love barbecue, so I'm either going to Franklin's Barbecue or Terry Black's, getting some brisket and some ribs, uh, and then I'm hopping all the way up to San Francisco. There's a bakery in the Sunset District near Golden Gate Park that I used to go to all the time that I loved when I lived there. It's called Cinderella Bakery. They have such amazing fresh pastries that I could not find anywhere else. So if money was no object, I'm going to Austin, get some barbecue, then going straight to San Francisco for some cake.
Lovely. That sounds like a good meal. And then, if since we have a couple of minutes, what is one place you've not been to that you certainly like to go to?
So I've had the luxury of seeing some of the world as a child. Like I said, my father was in the military, so I got to travel to a few different countries as a kid. Uh, but as an adult, I actually have not traveled as much as I'd like to. I've traveled around the U.S. quite a bit for work and for fun. But the one place that's on my bucket list to go to is to Italy. I've always loved Italian food. I love the Roman history. I'm a big history guy as well. So Italy is just perfect for everything that I enjoy, and uh, not, nothing can really beat the food experience that I'm looking forward to over there.
I mean, hopefully, I've been to some countries in Europe, not Italy, but certainly on my list as well. So I think that brings us. I'm going to let you have the closing comment here in a second, but just to introduce Jeremy again, Jeremy Haas is the founder of Prefix Ops. We'll include the links to your company and your LinkedIn profile, Jeremy, so folks can definitely check that out. That being said, thank you so much for the time. Appreciate it. What you can just have your closing comment and then we'll call it wraps here.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. Like I said, we can go on for hours here, I'm sure, if we wanted to have the conversation. But as business owners, as entrepreneurs, we always have the option to push the envelope forward and chase the crazy ideas that we have. So everyone should always have that desire to go after what they want, no matter what it is. And you can always find me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. I'll have conversations with everyone. Uh, if you love the way I speak, I put a lot of free content out on TikTok as well, talking about the entrepreneur journey, little tips and tricks to help people succeed in their worlds. And always happy to have jump on here and have these conversations.
Thanks, Jeremy. Appreciate it. And folks, until next time, bye bye.